Okay, so you went to university, you got your degree, you finished in 4 years as planned. Now you're probably thinking, oh, I'm going to go to graduate school, spend another 3 years, and I'm going to come away with a PhD. Wrong. In this video, I'm going to tell you why getting a PhD can take forever, and I'm going to tell you about some of the most common problems people run into during the process. Hi, my name's Ryan Sinnett. Welcome to my channel. Stay tuned, things are about to get interesting. Okay, so first of all, the major difference between an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's, and a PhD is that in the undergraduate degree, you look through the course catalog, these are your requirements. It's a number of courses, maybe you have a thesis or a capstone project, but basically you go through these requirements, you graduate on time as expected, there's no uncertainty in there. When you go into graduate school, when you go to get a PhD, okay, you do actually have to take a couple courses. If you already have a master's, it might be 2 courses. If you don't have a master's, maybe it's like another 6 courses to make up for what you missed in the master's degree. But the point is you're going to take just a few courses, but most of the time you're going to be spending doing research, developing work that's ultimately going to go into your dissertation. You're going to have to create some body of work, make some contribution to the field, very minor contribution in most cases, but novel nonetheless. And that is uncertainty, because you really don't know exactly at the beginning what you're going to do. You might have a plan, you might have a direction, a research direction that you're going to go, but you don't really know where it's going to end up. One of the things you're going to do when you get to graduate school is you're going to form a thesis committee. This committee is ultimately going to be responsible for determining whether or not you graduate. Their job is to help you, guide you, mentor you along the way, and make sure that you've completed an adequate amount of research, that you've learned how to do research, and that you're therefore worthy of receiving the PhD degree. Your advisor is going to be the lead member on the committee, and then you're going to rope in some other faculty. You probably don't know anyone, so it may actually take you a few semesters or quarters to get this committee together. If your advisor is decent, he or she should actually be able to help you and suggest committee members and even help you get your foot in the door. A lot of times you may email these people and they may just not respond, especially depending on the school that you go to. They may just be really busy, and they may have their hands full and just not really have any interest. They don't know you, and they're not really necessarily thinking, oh, this is the next Einstein, I'm gonna definitely want to help mentor this person. So once you get your committee established, ideally you would lay out a plan. Hey, I'm gonna make one novel contribution to the field of this magnitude. I'm gonna write a couple conference papers and a journal article, something like this, and then okay, I'm gonna be ready to graduate. Well, that would be all well and good, but in most cases, I haven't seen most people take that kind of proactive approach. And typically, you're just kind of dragging along, doing research, acting as a research assistant, and doing whatever your advisor says. And you don't really have any metric or any way of gauging your progress toward actual graduation. One thing I've seen happen is your advisor can just become too busy for you. He or she could earn a large grant and then have his or her hands full dealing with a whole bunch of new students, writing other grants even, doing collaborations. In some cases, I've even seen advisors move from university to university. In fact, when I was at Texas A&M in graduate school, I was the first graduate student for my particular advisor to graduate with a PhD. And actually, as soon as I left, he actually moved to Georgia Tech, and he was there for a year, and then he moved to Caltech. And so actually some of my colleagues actually moved multiple universities with him. I've also seen other cases where some students aren't so lucky and they'll kind of get stuck at the old university and they'll be coordinating with their former advisor remotely. And that can introduce a whole big challenge, because it's one thing when you can walk into the guy's office and say, hey, we really need to get this resolved. I got to get out of here. But it's a totally different thing to have that conversation if you have to fly across the country to do it, or, you're trying to get a hold of the guy. So, that's another thing that I've seen happen that's fairly common. So obviously that can present a big challenge. So, try to keep in sync with your advisor, set out a plan, and make sure that even if your advisor does leave, you can stay and graduate and it won't really delay your schedule. It is possible to organize such a plan, but it definitely takes coordinating with your advisor and setting out a plan ahead of time. Now, another thing that's really fairly common is your research may not pan out. Okay, you have these big grand ideas of what you want to do. You want to save the world, right? Okay, well, maybe you'll settle for saving a single chipmunk. At the end of the day, you're like, hey, this is what I'm going to research. I have this hypothesis. I think this could be true. I want to explore this. And maybe people will even give you money to explore it. But then you go and you do your research and you do your studies. Maybe you do randomized controlled trials and you spend all this time setting up your RCTs. Maybe you went through this committee that made sure that all of your trials were humane. And then all of a sudden you do your results and you forget to record the data, or maybe the data don't show the trend that you were hoping to show. All of a sudden you spent potentially years just getting this study set up, and then you get the results and then there's nothing. So you could try to, get something else out of the data, but then you're talking about a retrospective study, which isn't exactly the same, value as the initial study you set out to prove. And so now you may be essentially back at square one, and now you're like, okay, what's the simplest thing I can do to graduate really quickly? This is something that commonly happens in biological sciences, for example. So whatever you're going to do, make sure, if it's not like a sure thing, that the lead time is manageable, and have a backup plan, right? If your main hypothesis is, a bit bold and out there, maybe take something also in parallel that's a little more believable, that, isn't as big of a leap of faith, something that's a little more surefire guarantee. One of my committee members once told me that, do your A+ work on your journal papers, your thesis, your dissertation. That could be your B, your C work, right? Nobody's going to read that thing. They are, however, going to read your conference papers, going to read your journal papers. You're going to be at conferences discussing these ideas with other people. And ultimately, your thesis is just going to be a regurgitation in a lot of cases of your papers. In fact, I've seen some people actually just staple their papers together, add a literature review, introduction, and conclusion, and call it a day. For me, I actually just rewrote it all from scratch, but this is stuff I've been thinking about for years, so it was fairly easy to just sit down and write that out in 2 weeks. Now, another thing that can happen, I'll just say, this one's a little crazy, but it did happen. A pandemic could strike. Okay, well, let's say you're working in the lab. All of a sudden, your university is like, well, you can't come on site anymore. And then for months and months and months, they're trying to work out their COVID policy, and eventually you get back on site, but that definitely delays your timelines. So, it happened already, in the last few years. It could happen again. So these kind of crazy, global things, they can happen, but it's something to, be aware of. And, now that we know that this can happen, maybe do you have a plan that can allow you to still be productive even if you can't make it to the office? Another common thing that can happen is your advisor may not want you to graduate immediately. Maybe you did a whole bunch of work really early on. Maybe you wrote 15 papers and everyone else in your university wrote like 3 papers, kind of like what I did. And, when you have a good student as an advisor, you may not even realize this if you're an advisor, but, there's like a moral hazard here, because this student is bringing in a bunch of grant money, doing a bunch of work, training your new students. To lose that person is a major hit to your lab that you can't recover from easily. And so, there's definitely, even if just the subconscious, some incentive to want to keep students as long as possible. Now, there's also, if you really think about it, a good reason to help students graduate. It does look good when your students graduate and go on and are successful, become professors, become industry titans. But that's a longer payback period. So, it's not immediately obvious that that's could be a more effective technique than keeping your students longer. So, how long does it take? Well, some people can actually do it in 3 years. Now, some people can spend 10 years or even more doing it. In some universities, credits will actually expire after 10 years. So if you took some courses in the first few years and you're not finishing in 10 years, you may actually have to take additional courses in order to graduate. I've actually known over the last 20 years or so, several people who have spent 10 years graduating, and some who have even dropped out. And this goes from when I was an undergrad at Caltech and knew some graduate students to my graduate years at Texas A&M. So I'm going to give you a piece of advice. If you are struggling to graduate, typically this comes with a feeling of stagnation, but you have to be honest with yourself and identify what is the actual problem. Did your research not pan out? Okay, you're going to have to do some more work, better plan better this time. Is your advisor stringing you along? This is way too common. There is a solution. You can talk to your committee. You can go and explain the situation. Hey guys, I wrote a ton of papers. Nobody else in the university has nearly the number of papers and awards that I have. What should I do? I really need to graduate here. And in a lot of cases, that's the point of forming the committee. Make sure you have a good relationship with these committee members, because they'll put pressure on other committee members and they'll make sure that you graduate in a reasonable amount of time and without having to do an insane amount of work compared to your colleagues. Or another thing that can happen is, have you just lost steam? Maybe you worked at it for 3, 4, or 5 years, your research is going slowly, and you kind of lost your focus. You're starting to think about other things. Maybe you're spending too much time in the gym. Maybe you had a kid. That's all well and good, but just understand that when you go into this program, you don't want to lose your focus. You don't want to lose steam, because the second you do, you lose all your momentum, and it just makes it that much harder to graduate. But be honest with yourself first and identify the problem, and then work to fix it. And if you're really stuck, leave a comment below, shoot me an email, and maybe I'll have a tip that applies to you. So just for reference, I went in thinking, okay, no master's degree. I'm going to spend 2 years on the master's, then 3 more years on the PhD. I ended up spending 7 years, even though I was awarded the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship, and I had 10 times, roughly 10 times the number of papers as my peers in the university, won all these awards. I was the gone fallen ear at the graduation. But at some point, I got that NSF fellowship. I was pretty happy doing my research, and I kind of took my eye off the ball. I was still working really hard, writing a lot of papers, going to conferences, but I wasn't really like, what is it exactly that I need to do to graduate? So I was just doing this research, but I really needed to just earlier sit down and have conversations with my advisor and my committee. I need to graduate. What do I need to do? And then lay out a plan and get alignment and kind of go through with it. Finally, I'll say, when I went to graduate school at Texas A&M, my advisor and we actually moved there together from Caltech. He was a postdoc there. He got a job at Texas A&M as a professor, asked me to come and be his first student. I was like, okay, so I agreed. Anyways, we packed up our shit in a U-Haul and we moved out there, and we made the lab. And so a lot of students, my name appeared everywhere. A lot of students looked to me as like, hey, you're an older student. Can I come and ask you advice? And so I made this video because over the years, a lot of different students have come up to me with tips on how to graduate and how to get through things effectively. The requirements aren't really clear, and you don't really know what you're doing. So I will say it is possible to reduce the uncertainty in the PhD program, to get through it faster and with more of a guarantee. But it takes some planning, it takes some forethought. So I've given advice to students over the years on how to do this, and I've had some of them come back to me years later and say, boy, Ryan, that advice you gave me was the best advice anyone's ever given me. I really didn't know what I was doing, and then I did what you said, and I was able to actually get out of there in a reasonable amount of time. Some people figure this out on their own, but other people hear it from older students. And I'll give you a glimpse of what the advice is, but I think I'll go into more depth in a later video. The gist of it is, get in there, figure out the requirements, get them as crystal clear, get alignment with your committee, make sure you have the right committee, talk to them, hey, this is what I'm planning to do to graduate, A, B, and C. I'm going to make this contribution or something similar, this level of contribution. I'm going to write this many conference papers, attend conferences. I'm going to write a journal article, and then I'm going to be done. And get them to agree to that. Get it in writing. Send out an email. And then continually send updates over the course of your graduate school career. Say, hey, this is how far I'm along on the plan. Take them to lunch. Talk to them, right? Keep them in the loop. And then as you get near, say, hey, I'm getting ready to graduate. I've completed 80% of my milestones. Take them along on the ride with you. Send them quarterly updates. Maybe every term, send them an update on what you've accomplished, how you're tracking relative to the milestones on the plan that you all agreed on. And that way, when it comes time to graduate, you're warning them, hey, it's coming up. I'm going to be sending you my thesis in 6 months, right? And so that way they know, and it doesn't come from out of the blue. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I know that he's been doing this work and he's probably ready to graduate. Not like, whoa, where did this come from? I haven't even heard from you in 5 years. So that's the gist of the advice. But like I said, I think it definitely warrants a deeper investigation. And I think that advice, because it can be so helpful to so many people, I think I should do it the service of going deeper into it in a future video. So until then, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to smash the like button and leave some comments below. What are you struggling with? I want to hear about it. And subscribe to my channel for notifications of future video. Share this video with your friends if you think it'll help them. And until next time, I'll see you later.